He held her by the arm, his touch firm, almost desperate. "You can't go, Helen, not now." The Baron's voice came out hoarse, a mere whisper of sound in the vastness of the room. Outside, the rain began to fall again, beating against the windows as if wanting to enter. With the meager bundle of clothes in her hand, the same gesture as months ago, she felt the world spin. His face, pale from his recent illness, was inches from hers. Before we delve into this story, please leave a comment with a rating from 1 to 10 and tell us which city you're joining us from. May this moment bring reflection and emotion to your heart. The gate of her aunt and uncle's farm slammed shut with a dry thud, a sound of finality. For 25-year-old Helen, that noise was the soundtrack of abandonment. Her aunt, with arms crossed and a gaze that cut deeper than any knife, decreed the sentence: "There's no longer a place for you under my roof." A young woman who refuses a good match out of sheer stubbornness is useless, only good for expenses and shame. The good match was Colonel Arthur Caldwell, a man whose age was triple hers and whose breath smelled of stale tobacco and desperation. Helen preferred the road, hunger, uncertainty. Anything was better than selling herself for a meal. With a small cloth bundle containing 2 changes of clothes and a bone comb, she turned her back on the only home she'd ever known. The rain, fine and insistent, began to fall, turning the red dirt road into a clinging mud pit that stuck to her bare feet. The landscape of the Appalachian foothills, near a small country town called Blackwood Creek, blurred into shades of gray and dark green. The smell of wet earth mingled with the sweet, sad aroma of hay rotting in the fields. In the distance, a chapel bell tolled 6 times, announcing that the day, like her old life, was over. She walked for hours, aimlessly, the cold creeping up her legs and settling deep into her bones. Dignity was the only thing she had left, an invisible treasure she carried in her chest. Her body, however, began to protest. Her legs trembled with exhaustion, hunger rumbled in her stomach, and dizziness threatened to fell her at any moment. It was then that amidst the thickening mist, she heard a sound different from the crying wind, the trotting of horses, a steady and powerful rhythm approaching. A dark carriage, imposing and out of place in that desolate landscape, appeared around the bend in the road. The black horses, with lustrous manes, slowed their pace as they approached Helen's solitary figure. The door opened and a man descended. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed with an elegance that did not belong in that place. His face was marked by an austerity that time and pain had sculpted, but his eyes, his eyes were a deep blue, a blue that seemed to carry all the sorrows of the world. It was Baron Alistair de Montfleur, owner of Shadowbrook Estate, the largest property in the region. Widowed 6 years prior, he lived reclusive in his grief, a man of few words and many silences. The sight of that young woman, covered in mud, with her black hair plastered to her face by the rain, and a look that mixed helplessness and stubbornness, took him by surprise. There was a silent strength in her, an integrity that misery could not erase. He, accustomed to dealing with the greed and falsity of men, found himself disarmed by that image. For an instant, prudence urged him to continue on his way. Giving shelter to a stranger could generate all sorts of gossip in the village. But compassion, a feeling he believed dead within himself, spoke louder. He approached, his leather boots sinking into the same mud that covered her feet. "Young woman, what are you doing on this road at this hour in this weather?" His voice was deep, a little rough from disuse. Helen raised her face. Her lips were purple with cold, but her voice came out firm, though low. "I'm just passing through, sir." looking for my destiny. Alistair felt a knot in his throat. That answer, so simple yet so profound, struck him. Destiny is not usually found on deserted roads in the middle of a storm. He hesitated, the internal conflict etched on his face. Finally, he extended his hand, a large hand calloused by work, despite the rings of nobility. My name is Alistair de Montfleur. I have an estate a few miles from here. I need people to help with sowing and milking. If you have any skill with that, I can offer you work and a roof over your head. Helen looked at the outstretched hand, then at the man's face. There was no malice in his eyes, only a deep weariness and a glimmer of pity. For someone who had nothing, that offer was a miracle. With her body trembling, not from cold, but from overwhelming relief, she accepted with a nod. I know how to sew, sir, and I learnt to milk since I was a girl. He helped her into the carriage. The interior was lined with dark velvet and smelt of leather and snuff. As the coachman cracked his whip and the horses resumed their trot, Helen huddled in the corner, feeling the absurd contrast between the luxury of that vehicle and her own misery. Through the window, she watched the muddy landscape pass, leaving behind the road that had almost become her tomb. A new path opened, as uncertain as the previous one, but which, for the first time that day, held a mere thread of hope. Shadowbrook Estate awaited her, a name that seemed to foresee the challenges yet to come. The arrival at Shadowbrook Estate was like entering another world, a world suspended in time. The great house, an imposing colonial-style building, with high windows and a veranda that embraced the entire facade, seemed to observe the newcomers with an ancient indifference. The dominant scent in the air was no longer that of wet earth, but of polished wood, candle wax, and a subtle perfume of withered flowers. The silence was dense, broken only by the echo of Alistair's footsteps on the wide plank floors. As they entered, a woman emerged from one of the dark corridors, as if sprouting from the shadows. It was Mars, Ursula, the housekeeper. Her grey hair was pulled back in a bun, so tight it seemed to pull the skin of her face, making her expression permanently severe. Her small, dark eyes scrutinized Helen from head to toe with immediate disapproval, lingering on her bare feet and soaked clothes. "Baron, dinner will be served in half an hour," she said, her voice thin and sharp, completely ignoring Helen's presence. "Ursula, this is Helen. She will be working with us starting today. She will help with sewing and kitchen duties. Please arrange a room for her in the back and provide dry clothes and something to eat," Baron Alistair commanded, in a tone that brooked no argument. The housekeeper merely nodded curtly, her gaze flashing with resentment. "As you wish, sir. Come along, young woman." Helen followed the woman through a labyrinth of long, silent corridors. The walls were adorned with old portraits of serious-faced people, but one in particular stood out, placed at the top of the main staircase. It was of a woman of serene beauty, with a sad smile and eyes that seemed to follow those who passed. "The late Baroness Isabella, the soul of this house," said Ursula, with an almost religious reverence, noticing Helen's gaze. "A saint. No one will ever take her place." The message was clear and direct. The room assigned to Helen was small and damp, with a tiny window overlooking the back of the property. There was only a narrow bed with a straw mattress and a cracked ceramic basin. It was humble, but after the road, it seemed like a palace. Ursula left a simple cotton dress and a rough towel on the bed. "Work begins tomorrow, before sunrise. I tolerate no laziness or insolence." And she left, closing the door with a bang that echoed the one from the gate earlier. In the days that followed, Helen felt the weight of being an outsider. The other servants, influenced by the housekeeper's hostility, treated her with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. Conversations ceased when she entered a room, and whispers resumed as soon as she left. "Who is that the Baron dragged in from the road? She looks pitiful, but who knows her intentions, ... Mrs. Ursula said people like that only bring misfortune." Helen found refuge in work. She spent hours in the sewing room, a forgotten and dusty room, mending sheets, repairing clothes, and giving new life to fabrics that seemed to have given up. Her hands, once calloused from farm work, moved with an impressive delicacy and precision. At milking before dawn, the contact with the animals and the smell of fresh milk connected her to a simpler life, a time when, despite the difficulties, she belonged somewhere. Baron Alistair, for his part, maintained a formal distance. He saw her from afar, a silent and hard-working figure who moved through the house without a sound, almost like a ghost. He was intrigued by her ability to endure loneliness and veiled mistreatment with a serenity that bordered on the impossible. He himself, surrounded by lands and riches, could not find a drop of the peace that a young woman seemed to carry within her. One night, tormented by insomnia, Alistair went down to the library in search of a book. The house was plunged into darkness, except for a single point of light coming from the sewing room. Curious, he approached silently and stopped at the door, unnoticed. There was Helen, sitting by an oil lamp, sewing a piece of clothing with an almost meditative concentration. The yellowish light illuminated her face, highlighting her delicate features and tranquil expression. The white thread she deftly handled seemed like a thread of hope stitching the darkness of the fabric. In that moment something stirred within the Baron. It was not pity nor desire. It was admiration. He saw in her not the destitute woman he had taken in from the road, but a woman of admirable strength and resilience. Her image, alone, rebuilding something with her own hands, was a mirror of his own life. He too needed repairs. His soul was in tatters, and perhaps, just perhaps, that young woman's presence could be the thread and needle he needed. He retreated silently, returning to his chambers with that image etched in his mind. That night, for the first time in a long time, Alistair de Montfloy felt that the house, once seemed a cold and silent tomb, had a heart beating again, and that heart was there, in that small room, by the light of a lamp. From that moment on, he knew he could no longer ignore her. The next day dawned differently at Shadowbrook Estate. The sun seemed a little warmer, and the air less heavy. The change, however, was not in the weather, but in the Baron's behavior. During breakfast, something he always did, alone and in silence, in his study, he appeared in the kitchen, to the surprise of all the servants. His eyes sought Helen, who was finishing cleaning the wood-burning stove. "Helen, good morning," he said, his voice sounding a little strange, like an instrument that hadn't been played in a long time. She turned, surprised. "Good morning, Baron. I see you have a magic touch for sewing." The sheets in my room looked new. A slight blush rose to Helen's face. "It's my job, sir. I'm glad you liked it. I would like you to come to the library later. There are some books with torn covers. Perhaps you could repair them." The order was, in fact, a disguised invitation, and everyone in the kitchen noticed. Mrs. Ursula, who was supervising the bread preparation, clenched her jaw so hard that a click was heard. Her eyes fixed on Helen with the fury of a venomous animal. That afternoon, Helen went to the library. It was a magnificent room, with walls covered from floor to ceiling, with shelves full of leather-bound books. The scent of old paper and noble dust hung in the air. Alistair was sitting in a green velvet armchair, a book open on his lap, though he wasn't reading. "Come in, Helen. Sit down," he said, gesturing to a nearby chair. She showed him the books he had asked her to repair. He examined them, but his interest was elsewhere. "Can you read?" he asked suddenly. "A little, sir. The priest in my old village taught me the basics. Would you like to learn more?" Helen's eyes sparkled. To her, books were a magical and unattainable universe. "I would love to, sir, but I don't want to be a bother. It's no trouble at all. My eyes tire easily at night. It would be a favor if you would read to me from time to time. In return, I'll help you with the more difficult words." And so began a new routine. Every evening after dinner, and when all her chores were done, Helen went to the library. At first, her reading was hesitant, stumbling over words, but Alistair was a patient teacher. He corrected her gently, explained the meaning of sentences, and, little by little, the stories from the books began to flow through her voice. They read novels, poetry, travelogues, and between one chapter and another, they talked. He asked her about her life before the estate, and she, in time, opened up, telling him about her simple dreams, her love for the land, the pain of losing her parents when she was still a child. He, in turn, began to share fragments of his own story, of the solitude that had consumed him since Isabella's death, of the feeling that life had lost its color. In those moments, in the dim light of the library illuminated only by candelabras, they were not the Baron and the servant. They were just a man and a woman, two lonely souls finding solace in each other's company. The entire house felt the change. The Baron seemed lighter, sometimes even smiled. And Helen, though still treated coldly by Ursula, walked with a little more confidence, as if her employer's friendship were an invisible shield. This closeness, however, was poison to Mrs. Ursula. She saw every smile, every conversation, as a betrayal of her beloved Baroness's memory. The housekeeper, who had loved Alistair in secret for years, with a sick and possessive love, could not bear the idea that a nobody, a drifter, was winning what she had never achieved. Envy turned into a plan. She began to subtly spread her venom. Poor Baron. So lonely. ... It's easy for a clever young woman to take advantage of a kind heart, she told a laundress. She's very sly. She acts like a poor thing, but I bet she has her eyes on his fortune, she commented to the cook. The final blow was struck one afternoon when she found Alistair alone in his study, reviewing the estate's accounts. She entered under the pretext of serving coffee and, with an expression of false concern, began to speak. "Baron, forgive my intrusion, but my devotion to this house and to the memory of Baroness Isabella compels me to warn you," she began, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. "This young woman, Helen, I've noticed things. She asks a lot about the finances, about the value of the lands. Just the other day I heard her commenting to the cook about what life as a baroness would be like. It was a blatant lie, but spoken with the conviction of a talented actress. Alistair, already a man made suspicious by life, felt a pang of ice in his chest. Could it be possible? Were Helen's sweetness and innocence just a mask? He remembered the day he found her, her vulnerability, but what if it was all an act? Doubt, once planted, began to take root in his weary heart. "Thank you for the warning, Ursula. I will be more vigilant," he said, his voice suddenly cold. Ursula left the office with a victorious smile hidden on her thin lips. She had sown the seed of distrust. Now, she just had to wait for it to germinate and destroy the small garden of affection that was beginning to blossom between Helen and the Baron. The seed of doubt, watered by Mrs. Ursula's malice, soon sprouted in Alistair's heart, A man who had already lost so much in life becomes, by nature, a fierce guardian of the little he has left. Distrust became the lens through which he observed Helen. Every gesture of kindness from her was now analyzed, dissected in search of a hidden agenda. The smile that once warmed him now seemed calculated. The serenity in her gaze, which he had so admired, transformed, in his mind, into a mask of dissimulation. The change was subtle at first, but for Helen, who had grown accustomed to the crumb of human warmth he offered, it was as if the sun had suddenly gone out. The reading sessions in the library became rare, and, when they did happen, they were tense. Alistair no longer corrected her with patience. His tone was dry, distant. The conversations that once flowed naturally gave way to a heavy silence, filled only by the turning of pages. He began to test her. One day, he deliberately left a small purse with a few coins on his desk. He spent the day observing her from afar, waiting to see if she would take it. Helen cleaned the room, saw the purse, and carefully placed it inside a drawer without touching the money. The gesture should have reassured the Baron, but his poisoned mind only thought, "She's clever. She knows I'm watching. She's waiting for a bigger prize." Helen felt his coldness like a physical blow. The pain was immense, for she had begun to harbor a genuine affection for that sad man, a mixture of gratitude, friendship, and something deeper that she dared not name. To see him withdraw without any explanation threw her back into the solitude she knew so well. She didn't understand what she had done wrong. She replayed every word, every attitude, searching for a flaw, a mistake that would justify that abrupt change. She found nothing. Anguish began to reflect on her face. The sparkle in her eyes faded, and she returned to being the silent, almost invisible figure of the early days. She retreated into herself, finding refuge again in exhaustive work. She sewed until her fingers ached, scrubbed the floor with unnecessary force, as if wanting to tear her own pain from the floorboards. Mrs. Ursula observed everything with satisfaction. Her plan was working perfectly. She approached Helen with false compassion, offering poisoned advice. "Don't be sad, girl. The Baron is like that, a man of changing moods. He still lives in the past, trapped by the Baroness's memory. No woman will ever be good enough for him." Each word was a nail in the coffin of Helen's hope. The atmosphere in the great house became unbearable. The tension could be cut with a knife. The other servants, sensing the shift in dynamics, returned to treating Helen with suspicion, now with another reason: she had, in some way, displeased their employer. The climax of this Cold War came on a stormy night. The rain fell violently, and lightning illuminated the dark corridors of the house. Alistair, tormented by his thoughts, drank brandy in his study. He felt like a fool for having believed in Helen, and an even greater fool for missing her company. Doubt gnawed at him from within, a fever in his soul. Suddenly, the door opened, and Helen entered, carrying a tray with chamomile tea. "You don't look well, sir. I thought a tea might help calm you," she said, her voice low and trembling. Alistair looked at her, his eyes clouded by drink and distrust. "What do you want, Helen? What do you truly want from me?" he asked, his voice heavy with a bitterness that shocked her. She stopped, the tray trembling in her hands. "I want nothing, sir. Only your friendship." He laughed, a dry, joyless sound. "Friendship? A young woman like you, without a roof over her head, wants only the friendship of a man like me. Don't take me for a fool. Tell me your price. Is it a dowry? A piece of land? Speak." His words were like daggers. The unjust accusation hurt more than the expulsion, more than hunger, more than the cold of the road. The tears, which she had held back for so long, finally rolled down her face. She placed the tray on the table, dignity once again her only armor. "You are mistaken, sir. The only thing I wanted was a place where I could be treated as a person. I thought I had found it. I see I was wrong." She turned and left, leaving him alone with his doubts and his venom. That same night, Alistair's body succumbed to the tension. The fever burning in his soul manifested in his body. He began to tremble uncontrollably, a chill running down his spine, followed by an unbearable heat. He tried to stand, but his legs gave way, and he fell to the study floor, unconscious. The storm outside was a perfect reflection of the chaos that had settled within Shadowbrook Estate. The sound of Alistair's body falling to the floor echoed through the silent house. Helen, who was in her room trying to calm her wounded heart, heard the muffled sound and felt a chilling premonition. Something was wrong. Ignoring the pain and humiliation, she ran back to the study. The scene she found left her breathless. The Baron was collapsed near the armchair, his face pale and sweaty, his breathing ragged. Without hesitation, she knelt beside him. "Mr. Alistair, speak to me." He didn't answer, only mumbled disconnected words, burning with fever. With a strength she didn't know she possessed, Helen managed to drag him to a nearby sofa. She ran to the kitchen, woke the cook, and sent him to seek help in the village, even in that storm. Then she returned to Alistair's side. Armed with a basin of cold water and clean cloths, Mrs. Ursula and the other servants appeared at the office door, drawn by the commotion. Seeing their employer in that state, they were paralyzed by fear. Fever in those times was often a death sentence. No one dared to approach. "Don't just stand there. Someone help me take him to his room," Helen shouted, her firm voice taking on an unexpected command. It took the help of 2 men to carry the Baron upstairs. Once in his room, Helen took charge of the situation. While the others huddled at the door, afraid of contagion, she began to care for him with fierce dedication. She changed his sweat-soaked clothes, placed cold compresses on his forehead, and wiped his face. Mrs. Ursula, seeing Helen in control, tried to intervene. "Get out of here, you insolent girl. Who do you think you are, touching the Baron? That's my job." Helen stood up and faced her, her eyes flashing. "Your job was to care for him, but you were too afraid to come near. Now if you're not going to help, please leave. He needs care, not an audience." The housekeeper was speechless, shocked by the young woman's audacity. Defeated, she retreated, but her gaze promised revenge. For 3 days and 3 nights, Helen did not leave Alistair's side. The village doctor came, diagnosed a strong fever caused by exhaustion of body and spirit, and prescribed teas and rest. But it was Helen's tireless care that kept him alive. She fed him broths when he could barely swallow, whispered words of encouragement when he was delirious, and held his hand during the worst chills. In those long days, she did not see the suspicious Baron who had humiliated her, but only a fragile and vulnerable man who needed her. On the 4th day, the fever finally subsided. Alistair woke, weak and confused, and the first thing he saw was Helen's face, tired, with deep circles under her eyes, but serene. She slept sitting in a chair beside the bed, her head resting on the mattress, her hand still close to his. The memory of the last few days returned in flashes, along with the remembrance of his cruel words in the study. Shame hit him with the force of a punch. While he had been ill, delirious, the woman he accused of being a gold digger had not left his side, risking her own health to care for him. Meanwhile, Ursula, the house's guardian, had barely appeared in the room. The truth became as clear as the day dawning outside. He had been a fool, a blind man manipulated by another person's malice. When Helen woke and saw that he was conscious, a smile of relief illuminated her exhausted face. "You're awake. Thank goodness. How do you feel?" "Helen." "Forgive me," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I was unjust. I was cruel." Tears welled in her eyes, but not of sadness. They were tears of relief. "It's all right, sir. The important thing is that you're better." Later, recovered enough to sit up, Alistair sent for Mrs. Ursula to come to his room. Helen was also present, at his request. The housekeeper entered with a falsely solicitous expression. "How good to see you better, Baron. I was so worried." Alistair looked at her with eyes cold as ice. "Ursula, I want you to tell me, in front of Helen, what you heard her say about my lands and about wanting to be Baroness." The housekeeper paled. She stammered, tried to deny, but Alistair's relentless gaze disarmed her. The lie, which had seemed so solid, crumbled in seconds. Pressured, cornered, she exploded. The venom she had harbored for years finally overflowed. "Yes, I lied. I lied because I couldn't stand to see this ... This drifter taking a place that isn't hers. I dedicated my life to this house, to caring for you, to preserving Isabella's memory. I loved you in silence all these years, and you never looked at me. Never. And then this poor little thing from the road arrives, and in a few months gets what I never had. Your attention, your smile. She doesn't deserve it. No one deserves to occupy Baroness Isabella's place, much less a commoner like her." The outburst was a cry of pain, of unrequited love, of a lifetime of frustration. Helen and Alistair listened, shocked, to the confession of an embittered soul. It wasn't just malice, it was a personal tragedy. When she finished, a heavy silence fell over the room. Ursula, her face bathed in tears of anger and humiliation, realized she had gone too far. There was no turning back. "Pack your things, Ursula," said Alistair, his voice low but firm. "I want you off my estate by the end of the day." She looked at him one last time. Love and hate mixed in a whirlwind, and left the room without another word. The truth, finally, had come to light, but the damage it caused would leave deep scars on all of them. Mrs. Ursula's departure was like the removal of a rotten pillar that supported the house's facade. With her leaving, a sense of emptiness and disorder settled in. The housekeeper, despite her bitterness, was the one who kept the estate's routine running with military precision. Without her, the servants seemed lost, wandering aimlessly, exchanging frightened glances and whispers about the future. Peace did not come with the villain's departure. In its place remained an uncomfortable silence, laden with uncertainties. For Helen, the victory had a bitter taste. She felt no pleasure in Ursula's humiliation, only a deep sadness for the pain that had been exposed. More than that, a feeling of guilt began to gnaw at her. She was the cause of all this turmoil. Her arrival had disturbed the order, unearthed painful secrets, and resulted in the expulsion of a woman who, for better or worse, had served that house for decades. She felt like a stone thrown into a calm lake, whose ripples had turned into a tidal wave. The other servants' gaze upon her also changed. If before there was distrust, now there was a reverent fear. She was the young woman who faced the housekeeper and won, the Baron's protégé. But this new position isolated her even more. No one dared to speak to her as an equal. She was no longer one of them, but she also didn't belong to the employer's world. She was caught in limbo, more alone than ever. Alistair, still recovering, tried to approach her, to rebuild the bridge that his distrust had dynamited. He called her for conversations in the garden. asked for her opinion on the house's administration, treated her with a respect and affection that went beyond gratitude. But Helen, wounded and confused, evaded him. She responded with monosyllables, kept her gaze down, and retreated into her tasks. The fear of being the pivot of more conflicts was greater than the desire to accept the affection he offered her. She came to the conclusion that her presence at Shadowbrook Estate was unsustainable. She would always be the outsider, the intruder, the cause of someone's misfortune. The tranquility she sought so desperately seemed to elude her, no matter where she went. With a heavy heart, she made a decision. She waited a few days, until the Baron was stronger, and then, on a grey morning that recalled the day of her arrival, she packed her few belongings in the same meager cloth bundle. She descended the stairs silently, on tiptoe, planning to leave unseen, leaving only a thank you note. But destiny, or perhaps Alistair's heart, had other plans. He was in the main hall, standing by the window, watching the fine rain begin to fall. He looked older, more tired. The illness had left its marks. When he turned and saw her there, standing on the last step, with the bundle in her hand, his face contorted in an expression of pain and panic. It was the same scene as months ago, on the muddy road. The same young woman, the same bundle, the same look of someone about to face the world alone. But now, everything was different. What existed between them was no longer a stranger's compassion, but a deep connection, forged in pain, care, and forgiveness. He walked slowly towards her, the fear of losing her stamped in every step. He stopped inches away, his gaze fixed on hers. "Are you leaving?" he asked, his voice almost inaudible. Helen swallowed hard, the words caught in her throat. She could only nod. He held her by the arm, his touch firm, almost desperate. "You can't go, Helen, not now." The Baron's voice came out hoarse, a mere whisper of sound in the vastness of the room. Outside, the rain began to fall again, beating against the windows as if wanting to enter. With the bundle of clothes in her hand, the same gesture as months ago, she felt the world spin. His face, pale from his recent illness, was inches from hers. "I have to go, sir. I am the cause of all this turmoil. Since I arrived, this house has known no peace," she managed to say, her voice choked with emotion. "Peace?" he repeated, a sad smile touching his lips. This house didn't know peace. It knew silence, resignation, death in life. It was a tomb, Helen, a mausoleum for my memories. You brought life back here. You brought me back to life. If you leave, this house will become a tomb again, and I will become a ghost again." His words hit her with overwhelming force. He wasn't asking, he was pleading. His blue eyes, which had so often seemed distant and cold, were now open, vulnerable, showing an entire world of solitude and the newfound hope of no longer being alone. "Stay," he pleaded, his voice now a soft yet powerful whisper. "Not as a servant, not as a seamstress. Stay as is the one who returned a soul to this place. Stay for me." Helen looked into those eyes, the deep blue that held an ocean of losses, and now a safe harbor. All her resistance, all her fear of others' judgment, all her determination to leave, all of it crumbled before the sincerity of that request. She knew that if she turned her back on him at that moment, she wouldn't just be leaving a house, but abandoning a part of herself she'd just found. The rain beat against the window, but inside that room, the storm in her heart finally began to calm. The morning after, Alistair's plea dawned, covered in a dense, strange silence. It was not the mournful silence of before, but the silence of one who holds their breath, waiting to see what happens after a great turning point. Helen awoke in her damp little room and, for an instant, thought it had all been a feverish dream. But the memory of Alistair's firm touch on her arm, of the desperation in his blue eyes, was too real. She had agreed to stay, but stay as what? The question hung in the estate's air like a mist. When she descended to the kitchen, the servants looked at her differently. There was no longer hostility, but a cautious curiosity. They had witnessed Mrs. Ursula's fall and the silent rise of that outsider. No one knew how to act. It was Josie, the cook, who broke the ice. "Good morning, dear. Did you sleep well? The coffee is fresh," she said, with a cordiality that sounded a little forced, but it was a start. Helen smiled, a genuine tired smile. "Good morning, Josie. Yes, I did, thank you." And as if nothing had changed, she picked up a cloth and began to wipe the counter, a gesture that told everyone she was still the same Helen. But Alistair wouldn't allow things to remain the same. After breakfast, he called her to the main hall. His pallor from the illness was already giving way to a healthier color, and his posture was that of a man who had made an irrevocable decision. "Helen, you can no longer stay in that room," he said, the practical tone hiding the depth of the gesture. "It's damp, small, not worthy of you. Please choose one of the guest rooms in the main wing." She hesitated, the old fear of others' judgment returning to haunt her. "But sir, Alistair, what will others think? I don't want to cause more problems." He approached, and for the first time, touched her face with a tenderness that made her tremble. "What others think no longer governs life in this house. What matters is that you feel good, that you feel at home. Because, to me, you are already the soul of this place." There was no arguing. He himself accompanied her to a room upstairs. It was spacious and airy, with jacaranda furniture, a four-poster bed with linen sheets, and a balcony that opened onto the main garden, the same one she had begun to care for. When Alistair left her alone to settle in, Helen walked to the window. Downstairs she saw the small back room, her old dwelling. It seemed to belong to another life. The sunlight entered generously into the new room, and for the first time since she had left her aunt and uncle's house, she felt that she belonged somewhere. It was not a feeling of possession, but of belonging. A solitary tear rolled down her face, not of sadness, but of a gratitude so immense that it ached. The days, then, took on a new rhythm, a new melody. The transition was not abrupt, but a slow and sure blossoming. Gradually, the servants, seeing that Helen's humility remained unchanged, relaxed. She continued to help in the kitchen, to mend clothes when needed, to listen to the laundress's stories. She won them over, not by her new position, but by the constancy of her character. The dynamic between her and Alistair deepened in a way neither of them had ever imagined. The conversations in the library, once focused on books, became windows into each other's souls. He told her about Isabella, not with the acute pain of grief, but with the serene longing of one who has learnt to keep love in the heart without it becoming an anchor. He spoke of his youthful dreams, of how he wanted to have been an explorer, a botanist, before the weight of his title and lands defined him. Helen, in turn, opened the doors to her simple world, the smell of the bread her mother made, the feel of the cold earth under her feet in the garden, the recurring dream of having a small garden all her own. Afternoons became sacred. They were theirs. They went for long walks, and he, who knew every inch of the estate's secrets, showed her the secrets of the farm. They were no longer just strolls. They were life lessons. He taught her to differentiate bird songs, to read the clouds to predict rain. She, with her instinctive knowledge of the countryside, showed him the medicinal plants that grew by the stream, teaching him how to make teas that soothed not only his body, but also his restless soul. The garden became their shared project. What began as Helen's pastime turned into a shared passion. He sent for rare seeds from the capital, and together they spent hours with their hands in the earth, clearing the flower beds that time had suffocated, planting new seedlings, bringing back the colors and perfumes that the house had forgotten. One day, as they were planting a new rose bed, their hands touched under the soil. The contact was electric, but neither of them recoiled. They looked up and stared at each other, dirty with earth, sweaty from the sun, and smiled. In that moment, they understood that they were not just cultivating a garden, but the seed of love growing between them. Their love was not an overwhelming passion, a summer storm. It was like the sunrise, a gradual brightening, a warmth that spreads gently, unhurriedly, until everything round is bathed in light and warmth. It was born of mutual respect, deep gratitude, and the vulnerability they dared to show each other. He fell in love with her resilience, with the strength that needed no shouts, with the wisdom that did not come from books. She fell in love with the kindness he hid beneath his austere shell, with the way his sad eyes lit up when she told a simple story, with the care he began to show not only her, but everyone around him. One evening, after a quiet dinner, they were sitting on the veranda, watching a deep blue sky, sprinkled with stars that looked like diamonds scattered across velvet. The silence between them was perfect, filled only by the sound of crickets and the scent of jasmine rising from the garden. Alistair, who was holding a cup of tea, set it aside and turned to her. His expression was serious, but his eyes shone with a contained emotion. He took her hand. The hand that once seemed so fragile to him was now his anchor. "Helen," he began, his voice a little hoarse, "for a long time I believed that love was a door that closes only once in a lifetime. When Isabella left, I not only locked that door, but built a wall around it. I thought I would live forever in the darkness of my grief, managing the shadows. But you didn't try to force the door open. You didn't try to scale the wall. You simply planted a seed right outside, and the flower that bloomed was so beautiful that its light pierced through the cracks and showed me the way back." He adjusted himself in his chair, turning completely towards her, his blue eyes fixed on hers with an intensity that left her breathless. "I no longer want to walk these fields alone. I want to share my days, my worries, my joys with you. I want to hear your laughter echoing through these corridors. I want this estate to be our home, not just my refuge. Helen, the woman who taught me that even the driest heart can bloom again. Will you marry me?" The proposal hung in the air, as pure and true as the starlight. It was not a surprise, for her heart already knew, already expected, had already said yes 1,000 times in silence. The tears that welled in her eyes were of a happiness so overwhelming that it seemed too great to fit in her chest. It was the conclusion of a journey that began in the mud and ended there, under the stars, in the arms of the man who was her destiny. "Yes, Alistair," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. 1,000 times yes. "I accept." At that exact moment, a shooting star streaked across the dark sky, an ephemeral and eternal trace of light, as if the universe itself was sealing their promise. The new era, full of sun, flowers, and love, was, finally, ready to begin. The news of the wedding spread through Shadowbrook Estates not like a decree, but like a spring breeze entering through the window after a long and harsh winter. There would be no formal announcement in the capital's newspapers, nor a guest list full of important names and pompous surnames. Alistair and Helen decided, in a silent agreement, that this moment belonged to them and to that land, to those people who had become their true family. The celebration would be a reflection of their story, simple in appearance, but immensely rich in meaning. In the days leading up to the ceremony, the entire estate transformed into a hive of happy activity. It was a bustle that came not from orders, but from the genuine desire of everyone to participate in that miracle. In the kitchen, Josie, the cook with generous hands and an even more generous heart, planned the feast as if it were a military operation. The cake has to be cornmeal with guava paste, just like Miss Helen likes it, and roasted suckling pig to ensure abundance, she declared, as she kneaded the bread with contagious energy. The farmhands took charge of building a large arbor on the lawn, decorating it with palm leaves and fern fronds, creating a party hall under the blue sky. The laundresses, between one piece of clothing and another, gossiped with smiles on their lips, sewing small colored ribbons to tie on the trees, and fondly remembering the arrival of that thin, frightened young woman who would now become the lady of those lands. While the estate adorned itself, Helen dedicated herself to her dress. She refused Alistair's offers to send for the most expensive fabrics from the city. Instead, she chose a roll of simple, pure white linen, which had been stored in the warehouse for years, in the old sewing room, the same place where the Baron saw her for the first time in a new light. She spent hours working. Each stitch of the needle was a meditation, a remembrance. She remembered the road, the cold, the helplessness, and she gave thanks. She remembered Alistair's suspicious gaze, the pain of rejection, and she forgave. She remembered his care during his fever, his plea for her to stay, and she loved. The dress was not just a piece of clothing. It was her story being woven, stitch by stitch, transforming pain into beauty. On the eve of the wedding, Alistair found her there, finishing the last details of the hem. He stopped at the door, exactly as on that night, and watched her. The late afternoon light streamed through the window, enveloping her in a golden aura. She was so concentrated that she didn't notice him. He felt a knot in his throat, an emotion so strong it almost choked him. The man who considered himself dead inside was there, about to marry the woman who taught him to breathe again. He approached silently and touched her shoulder. She turned with a smile that was solely his. "It's beautiful," he whispered. "You are beautiful," she replied, and in that moment the whole world narrowed to that small room and the promise of tomorrow. The wedding day dawned glorious, with a sun that seemed to have been ordered. The estate's small chapel, which for so many years had only opened for funeral masses, was radiant. Wildflowers, gathered at dawn, filled the air with a sweet and earthy perfume. The servants and their families occupied the wooden benches, the men in their best shirts, the women in colorful dresses with flowers in their hair. They were not just spectators. They were part of the ceremony, the living witnesses of the transformation of that place. Alistair waited at the altar. He wore a dark, well-tailored suit, but the formality of the clothes could not hide the emotion that overflowed from his blue eyes. He looked at the chapel door with an almost childlike anxiety. Beside him, old Tim, the foreman, a man of few words and infinite loyalty, gave him a reassuring pat on the back. "Calm your heart, boss. The most beautiful bride in the world is on her way." And she came, accompanied by Tim, who would give her away like a proud father. Helen walked slowly down the church aisle. The linen dress fell with elegant simplicity, and the crown of white flowers in her black hair was the only jewelry she needed. Her gaze did not waver for a single second from Alistair's. In that aisle, she saw her entire life pass by. The orphaned girl, the expelled young woman, the woman who found a home where she least expected it. When her eyes met his, all the past dissolved. There was only the present, and the promise of a future. The priest, a simple man from the neighboring village, conducted the ceremony with words that spoke more to the heart than to formality. He spoke of how love can be a shelter in a storm, a light in the darkness, a seed that sprouts in the most improbable soil. When it was time for the vows, Alistair held Helen's hands, those hands that had healed him, and said with a choked voice, "I, Alistair, take you, Helen, as my wife. I promise to be your companion, your friend, your safe harbor. I promise to honor the light you brought into my life, and never again let darkness take hold of this house, nor my heart." Helen, with silent tears streaming down her face, replied, "I, Helen, take you, Alistair, as my husband. You gave me a roof when I only had the sky, and you gave me a home when I only knew solitude. I promise to care for your heart as I cared for you, with all the strength and all the tenderness within me." Their yes echoed through the chapel, followed by the sound of bells that now announced life, joy, a new beginning. The kiss was tender and deep, the celebration of two souls who had finally found each other completely. The celebration on the lawn was the materialization of happiness. The accordion of one of the farm hands wailed a lively jig, and soon couples were twirling on the grass. Children ran everywhere, laughing and getting dirty with cake. Alistair, who hadn't been seen smiling for years, was pulled onto the dance floor by Helen and let himself go, awkward and happy. He twirled her, and with each spin he saw the woman of his life, the improbable Baroness who had conquered not only him, but everyone around her. As dusk fell, when the sky began to paint itself in warm colors and the party quieted, they retreated to the great house's veranda. From there, they watched the lamplight being lit, the diminishing sound of music, the peace that settled in. He embraced her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. They remained in silence for a long time, a silence filled with all that went unsaid. "It's funny to think, ... Single quotes," she began, her voice a whisper. "Single quotes ... That less than a year ago, I was on that road, alone, my feet in the mud, thinking my life was over. And I was inside that carriage," he completed, "thinking the same thing about mine. A man who only saw shadows everywhere." "And what do you see now?" she asked, turning her face to look at him. Alistair looked into her eyes, and the whole world seemed to stop. "Now, I see a field ready to be planted. I see a garden that has bloomed again. I see the sunrise, every day, here, reflected in your eyes. I see life, Helen. The life you gave back to me." He turned her to face him and held her face in his hands. "You didn't just find a home, my love. You became the home, my home." At that instant, the wind blew through the curtains in the room, and the light of a lamp inside the house flickered, projecting their shadows on the wall, united as one. It was the final reminder that even the darkest night can be overcome by a single flame of hope. The expelled young woman and the widowed baron were no longer defined by their losses, but by the strength they found in each other. Their destiny had not simply changed. It had been forged with patience and love forever. Shadowbrook Estate was, finally, free of its ghosts, ready to be a place of laughter, dreams, and a new and beautiful story. So, did you enjoy this journey of overcoming and love? If this story touched your heart, Don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any new content. Give us a generous like that helps us immensely to keep creating. And most importantly, comment below what you thought. Your opinion is our greatest gift. Until next time.